Hello, I am Zakar, and in this documentary, I will explore how the Declaration of Independence influenced a key moment from America's 250-year history. The key moment that will be explored in this documentary is the Civil War. Richard Norton Smith, a presidential historian, will discuss how the North and South were divided.
Party, the Republicans, which were defined as being anti-slavery, but not radically anti-slavery. They were not abolitionist. They were all about containing the spread of slavery. And Lincoln won with just under 40% of the vote. And the sheer news of his election, as you say, led 7 southern states almost immediately to secede.
The White House that the First Lady inherited had been the domain of.
Next up, Caroline Janney, a history professor from Purdue University, will discuss the Confederate view of the Civil War.
Literal sense, but not lost. Not lost because it was wrong, but it's probably a good segue for Karen.
Yeah, I tend to think about 5 tenets of the lost cause. And those are first and foremost that the Civil War was not about slavery, that it was a constitutional struggle over states' rights, that Confederate soldiers had fought honorably and bravely, that they had not lost, they had not been defeated on the battlefield, but turning to what the first panel this morning talked about, that they were simply overwhelmed by superior manpower, northern manpower and material. That the fourth tenet being that Lee and to some extent Jackson and others were nearly godlike figures. And finally, I would add that Southern women on the home front had been devoted, unquestionably devoted to the Confederate war effort throughout.
And to add one thing to your 5, what's the position of enslaved people in the lost cause?
Now, John Wow, a history professor from UCLA, will explore the Union's perspective on the Civil War.
Established by the Constitution and followed through by George Washington. That's what Northerners thought, to keep the Union whole. And American exceptionalism, unlike today, was popular back then. And I think we can look at the speeches of Abraham Lincoln for that. But the point is that it was a country that was very well aware of that history and the importance of keeping the country together.
Not just the Confederacy, which harkens back to the very meaningfully to the Revolution that appropriate.
Barbara Gannon, a history professor from University of Central Florida, will discuss African Americans serving in the Union Army during the Civil War.
With a discussion of the scope and significance of the service in the U.S. Army of African American troops. Barbara, maybe you want to get us started.
Well, first you have to understand, the U.S. colored troops are so much more than anyone imagines. So everyone relies on Glory, which is 1 state regiment, and Massachusetts had 3 state regiments. But really the U.S. colored troops are federal volunteer units. There's over 140 of them of various kinds. They're a significant military force. Now what's interesting, I think, is that at the beginning of the war, none of the white Northerners would have ever imagined that you would have had black Northern soldiers. In fact, they turned many, many patriotic Northern freemen away. So it was only the process of the war, i.e. the high death count, sickness, and the fact that it didn't go well that prompted people to really think about arming African Americans. But of course it was essential for it to be about freedom, the war, and the Emancipation Proclamation, which authorized it. So you had over 180,000 troops.
Finally, history and African American studies professor from Duke University will explore the 13th Amendment and its impact on the Declaration of Independence.
Segue then to another theme that we've touched on as we've moved along and that we wanted to return to. And that is the 13th Amendment. It's come up in a number of different contexts. Let's think a little bit about emancipation as a process. One of the big takeaways of this sesquicentennial is that emancipation is a process that unfolds gradually, not a moment that's synonymous with Lincoln's proclamation of 1863. Why is the 13th Amendment necessary, given that Lincoln has already promulgated his Emancipation Proclamation 2 years earlier?
Well, it seems to me that first, if I could just back up a bit, the importance of the USCT was primarily to ensure that the nation understood that the Civil War by 1863 had become more than a war for union, but a war for freedom as well.
This documentary was presented by First Ladies and American History TV C-SPAN 3. This concludes the documentary.